Garrett Hale's voice thundered through the crowded hallway like a gunshot. "Who let this cockroach teach our children?" 30 students and 2 teachers stood frozen. No one spoke. Morgan Ellis, the new English teacher, remained perfectly still, her eyes steady. "I'm talking to you, Roach," he snarled, stepping closer. Morgan met his gaze without flinching. "I was hired to teach." "Same as you," Garrett snapped. He slapped the binder from her arms, seized her shoulder, and shoved her hard to the ground. She hit the floor with a sickening impact, papers exploding across the tiles. Laughter erupted from the men around her. "Stay down there, cockroach. That's where your kind belongs." 5 men loomed over her, laughing. Morgan didn't cry. She didn't speak. She gathered her papers one by one, her hands steady and sure, never trembling. These were not the hands of a frightened teacher. These were the hands of someone trained for challenges far more dangerous than a hallway bully. Garrett Hale had knocked down the wrong woman, and he had no idea what was coming. To understand what happened next, you need to know where it all began and who Morgan Ellis really was. Ridgemont High sat at the edge of a small town in southern Georgia, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business. The school looked forgotten by time and the state. Paint peeled from every wall, half the ceiling tiles were missing. The air conditioning had broken down years ago and never been fixed. Hallways smelled of mildew and old floor wax. The football field was patchy and brown. The library shelves stood mostly empty. Teachers came and went frequently. Most didn't last long. Those who stayed learned one rule fast: don't cross Garrett Hale. He taught physical education and had been at Ridgemont for years, long enough to build real power. Tenure and union protection gave him cover, along with quiet arrangements with every administrator who passed through. He ran the school's after-school fundraisers, car washes, bake sales, raffles. On paper, the money went to student programs. In reality, most of it lined his pockets and kept his 4 loyal friends comfortable: Reed Lawson, Colton Briggs, Tanner Holt, and Jace Porter. All staff, all loyal. They controlled the hallways, the parking lot, the faculty lounge. Younger teachers learned to keep their heads down. Those who didn't were pushed out. Several had left in recent years. No complaints filed, no investigations, just gone. Principal Langford ran the school like a man fleeing a fire, eyes straight ahead, never looking back. He knew exactly what Garrett was doing. He chose peace over justice every single time. That was the world Morgan Ellis walked into one quiet morning. She arrived in an old pickup truck with 1 box of books in the back. No family dropped her off. No friends waited at the entrance. Just a woman in a clean blouse and flat shoes, carrying everything she owned into a building that didn't want her. Morgan had grown up in rural Mississippi, raised by her grandmother after her mother left and her father never appeared. They lived in a house with a leaking roof and 1 working heater. Her grandmother cleaned houses 6 days a week. On Sundays, she made Morgan read aloud from whatever books they could find. At 18, Morgan faced 2 paths: minimum wage work or the Marines. She chose the Marines, not because she wanted to fight, but because she craved structure, discipline, and a reason to rise at dawn, believing each day held purpose. She served for years at Paris Island, rising to senior drill instructor. She trained hundreds of recruits. She could read body language the way most people read street signs, swift, instinctive, and never wrong. Her hands knew countless ways to end a fight before it began. Her voice could freeze a room full of grown men. But at Ridgemont, she used a different voice. Soft, patient, almost gentle. It was a choice. When her grandmother suffered a stroke, Morgan left the Corps with an honorable discharge and full benefits. She returned south and enrolled in a teaching program. Not for better pay, it wasn't, but because her grandmother had once told her, "The best thing you can do with strength is build someone up." So Morgan came to Ridgemont to teach English, to build. She never spoke of the Marines, never displayed her medals, never corrected anyone who assumed she was just another young teacher who wouldn't last. She kept her military ID tucked in the bottom of her desk drawer, beneath a stack of grammar worksheets. No one knew, not the students, not the staff, not Garrett Hale. On her first day, she set up her classroom alone. She taped a quote above the whiteboard: "Discipline is choosing your moment." That evening in the parking lot, Garrett leaned against his truck and lit a cigarette. Reed stood beside him. "New girl in room 14, Reed said. "Quiet type." Garrett exhaled smoke into the evening air. "Give her a couple of weeks. She'll quit like the last few." He flicked the cigarette onto the pavement and walked away, completely unaware of what lay ahead. Morgan's first faculty meeting was brief. She sat in the back row, speaking only when spoken to. Garrett dominated the room as if he owned it. When classroom assignments were read, every teacher received their usual room. Then Garrett turned to Morgan. "Room 108, at the end of the east wing." A few teachers exchanged knowing glances. Room 108 had sat unused for years. Black mold on the ceiling, no projector, one window that wouldn't open, a vent that blew warm air in summer and nothing in winter. Morgan nodded calmly. "That works. Thank you." Garrett smiled, the kind of smile that said he had just won, and she didn't even realize it. But Morgan made it work. She scrubbed the walls herself after hours, brought in her own lamp, and taped poems and vocabulary words across every surface until the room felt alive. Before long, students began arriving early, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. One of them was Darius, a sophomore, quiet and slender in the hallways, but razor-sharp in discussion. Other students picked on him, stole his notebook, tripped him between classes. Teachers looked the other way. Darius had learned to hug the walls and keep his eyes down, but in Morgan's class he sat in the front row, spoke up, asked questions, and even laughed. Garrett noticed. Not the teaching, not the growth. He noticed that students liked her more than they liked him. And for him, that was enough. Soon, Morgan's supply budget vanished, redirected to the PE department. Then, whispers began in the faculty lounge. Morgan Ellis had faked her college transcripts. No proof, just whispers, all tracing back to the same source. Morgan went to Principal Langford with documentation, transcripts, and certification letters. She laid them calmly on his desk. Langford barely glanced up. "Garrett's been here for years, Miss Ellis. I'd suggest finding a way to get along." Morgan walked out without another word. The next morning, she unlocked her classroom door and froze. Every desk was overturned, books scattered across the floor, and on the whiteboard in bold red spray paint were two words: "Go home." Morgan stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she set down her bag, picked up the first desk, and got to work. She didn't call anyone. She didn't report it. But that night, she stopped at a hardware store and bought a dash cam, mounting it on her truck's dashboard before dawn. Morgan Ellis was done hoping things would improve. She was beginning to prepare for just how bad they might become. Garrett Hale sat alone in his office after school, door shut, blinds drawn. He wasn't grading papers. He hadn't written a genuine lesson plan in years. His coaching records were riddled with fabrications, win-loss numbers inflated, participation forms signed by students who never showed up. The fundraiser accounts had discrepancies large enough to drive a truck through. None of that mattered to him, not as long as everyone at Ridgemont stayed in line. Then Morgan Ellis arrived. She didn't challenge him directly. That was the problem. She didn't have to. Every time her students improved, every time a parent spoke positively about room 108, it reflected back on Garrett like a mirror he didn't want to face. If someone like her, with no connections and no tenure, could achieve so much with so little, what did that say about him? Garrett leaned back and cracked his knuckles. He picked up his phone and texted Reed. It was time to turn up the heat. The next day it began. Tanner Holt shouldered Morgan hard in the hallway between classes, sending her stumbling into the lockers. He kept walking without a glance or apology. Morgan straightened her blouse and kept moving. Days later, Jace Porter followed her to the parking lot after school. He stood near her truck, filming her on his phone with a smirk. When she asked him to stop, he laughed and walked away. That night, Morgan found 2 of her tires slashed. There were no cameras in the staff lot, no witnesses willing to speak. She called a tow truck, waited in the dark, and recorded every detail in a leather-bound journal she kept in her glove box. She had begun the journal early on. Now it was filling rapidly. She also saved every email, every denied supply request, every schedule change that targeted her. She filed them in a folder labeled Teaching Resources, though it was anything but. Soon after, Garrett made his move. Morgan was in the gym storage room after school, returning cones she had borrowed for a classroom activity. The room was small, concrete walls, metal shelves, one door. Garrett walked in behind her and let the door close. "You're still here," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm returning equipment," Morgan replied. Garrett stepped closer, close enough for her to smell coffee and cigarettes. He flicked her lanyard so it snapped back against her chest. "Let me make this simple for you," he said, voice low and raw. "You don't belong here. Not in this school, not in this town. Your little classroom makeover, your little fan club of kids. None of that matters. I decide who stays and who goes." Morgan didn't step back. She looked straight into his eyes and said nothing. 5 seconds passed. 10. Garrett's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to silence. Yelling he could handle, crying he could relish, but silence made him feel small. He stepped back first, pointing a finger at her face. "Clock's ticking, Roach." Then he walked out. Morgan stood alone in the storage room and wrote every word in her journal. Then she went home. The next day, Darius stayed after class. He closed the door. "Miss Ellis, I saw what Tanner did to you in the hallway." Morgan looked up. "I'm fine, Darius." "No, it's not fine," he said, fists clenched. "They do the same thing to me every day. I'm tired of doing nothing." Morgan studied him, the anger in his jaw, the shame beneath it. She had seen that look countless times on young recruits who believed fighting was the only way to prove they weren't weak. "Darius, sit down." He sat. "Discipline is not doing nothing," she said quietly. "Discipline is choosing your moment. You throw a punch now, you get expelled. They win. You wait. You document. You build your case. And when the time comes, you stand so tall, they can't ignore you." Darius stared at her. "How long do I wait until it counts?" He didn't fully understand, but he trusted her. He picked up his backpack and left. Meanwhile, Garrett called a meeting of the Booster Club, 6 parents who ran most of the school's volunteer programs. He told them Morgan was difficult, aggressive, not a team player. The word aggressive hung in the air with a weight everyone understood, but no one named. Before long, a couple of parents complained to Principal Langford about the new English teacher. They couldn't name a specific problem. They just had a feeling. Langford filed the complaints without investigation. Morgan was never told they existed. Then Garrett played his final card. He stood at the next faculty meeting with a wide grin. "I've been thinking. Morale's been low. Let's do something fun. A staff fitness challenge. Obstacle course on the football field. The whole school is invited. Parents, too." He looked directly at Morgan. "Everyone participates. No exceptions." A few teachers clapped. Most stayed silent. They knew exactly what this was. Reed leaned over to Colton. "She's going to embarrass herself in front of the whole town." Morgan sat in the back row, hands folded, face unreadable. But under the table she pressed her thumb against the scar on her left knuckle, the one from combat training at Paris Island, and made a decision. She would show up. She would participate, and she would let Garrett Hale build his own stage. Whatever happened on that stage would become his problem. That night, Morgan sat on her apartment floor with her journal open and called Shelby Grant, a former Marine from the same unit, now a Veterans Affairs attorney in Atlanta. Shelby could read a legal document the way Morgan read body language, swiftly and without mercy. "How bad?" Shelby asked. "Multiple incidents over recent weeks. Physical contact more than once. Property damage. Slander. All documented. Dashcam running daily. Emails saved and backed up." Shelby was quiet for a moment. "Don't file yet. Let them keep going. The longer the pattern, the harder it is to explain away. And Morgan, whatever happens at that fitness challenge, make sure someone else is filming, not you." Morgan nodded. She already knew who. After the call, she spread her evidence across the floor. Journal entries, screenshots, timestamps, dates matched to emails and parking lot footage. A dozen pieces, all clean. She closed the journal, walked to her closet, and pulled out a pair of combat boots she hadn't worn in some time. She set them by the front door. Morgan wasn't planning to fight. She was planning to finish it. On the morning of the event, the sun was already hot. A folding table with water bottles and a clipboard stood ready. A banner stretched between poles. "Ridgemont Staff Fitness Challenge," in bold red letters. Half the town showed up. Parents in lawn chairs, students along the fence, local business owners near the bleachers with coffee. Garrett had promoted it heavily. He wanted an audience. He got one. The obstacle course stretched the length of the field. Tire run, rope climb, low crawl under cargo net, wall climb, sprint to the finish. Garrett had designed it himself. Heavy on upper body, built for men who spent weekends lifting weights and reminding everyone about it. He stood at the start line in a sleeveless shirt, arms crossed. Reed, Colton, Tanner, and Jace flanked him like a wall, all smiling, all watching Morgan. She stood at the far end of the line in black leggings and a plain gray shirt, hair pulled back tight, expression unreadable. She looked like someone simply waiting for a bus. "Looking a little nervous over there," Garrett called out. A few parents laughed. Morgan didn't look up. She adjusted her flat training sneakers and waited. Principal Langford blew the whistle. Garrett took off fast and loud, arms pumping. His boys followed, Reed grunting through the tires, Tanner attacking the rope. Morgan started slow and controlled. Her feet hit each tire with precision. No wasted motion. No noise. While Garrett fought the course, Morgan moved through it as if she had built it herself. The rope climb separated them. Garrett muscled his way up, strong but sloppy. His face flushed, shoes slipping twice. He reached the top and slapped the bar with a yell. Morgan reached the rope moments later. She wrapped it around her boot with a precise Marine technique, smooth, silent, and reached the top before Reed was halfway up. The crowd went quiet. The low crawl came next. Garrett dropped and powered through on his elbows. Fast, aggressive, dirt flying. Morgan dropped flat and moved like water, chest to the ground, elbows and knees in perfect rhythm. She cleared the net a full body length ahead of him. Now, people were standing. The wall climb, 8 feet of plywood, no footholds. Garrett jumped, grabbed the top, and hauled himself over with a grunt. Morgan hit the wall at a jog. One step on the base, hands on the edge, and vaulted over in a single fluid motion. The kind of move you learn when a drill instructor is screaming and the clock is running out. She crossed the finish line first. The crowd didn't clap right away. They just stared. Then one student near the fence began clapping, then another. Soon the whole sideline joined in. Garrett stood at the finish line, chest heaving, face red, sweat dripping from his chin. He stared at Morgan as if she had stolen something from him. Morgan stood still, breathing evenly, hands at her sides. "Lucky run," Garrett said loudly. Morgan said nothing. That was the wrong move. Silence was the one thing Garrett couldn't handle. It made the crowd look at him. It made him feel small. He walked toward her fast, got in her face. I said, "Lucky run." Morgan looked at him calmly. "I heard you." Garrett shoved her hard with both hands on her shoulders. She stumbled back 2 steps, but didn't fall. The crowd gasped. "Garrett, stop!" Someone called from the bleachers. He didn't stop. He grabbed her arm and pulled her forward. "You think you're better than me?" Tanner moved in from the left, Colton from the right. Reed stepped up behind her. Jace circled wide, cutting off her exit. 5 men, 1 woman, 100 witnesses. Morgan's breathing changed. Not faster, but deeper. Her weight shifted to the balls of her feet. Her hands came up, open, palms facing out. A stance no one in the crowd recognized, but any Marine would know. Garrett swung first, a wide right hook aimed at her jaw. Morgan stepped inside the arc. Her left hand redirected his wrist. Her right hand locked under his elbow. One twist and Garrett's body followed his arm. His feet left the ground. He hit the dirt flat on his back with a heavy, wet thud that echoed across the field. Tanner charged from the left. Morgan pivoted, caught his lead arm, stepped across his body, and used his momentum to sweep his legs. He went down face first into the grass. Colton came next, swinging wild. Morgan ducked low, stepped behind his knee, and applied a standing joint lock to his wrist. He dropped to 1 knee. She held the lock for a moment, just long enough for him to feel it. Then released. Reed hesitated. That was his mistake. Morgan closed the gap in 1 step, hooked his ankle with her foot, and pressed his chest with an open palm. Simple and clean. He fell backward like a felled tree. Jace didn't swing. He raised both hands and backed away. "Stay down." Morgan's voice carried across the silent field. Not yelling, not shaking. It was the voice of a woman who had said those words 1,000 times to recruits twice her size. Garrett lay on his back, blinking at the sky. His shoulder burned with pain. He rolled over and looked up at Morgan. She stood in the center of the field. The 5 men on the ground were retreating, breathing evenly, hands still open, not a scratch on her. She hadn't thrown a single punch. The crowd erupted. Students screamed, parents stood on their chairs. Darius pressed stop on his phone camera, his hands shaking. He had captured every second, from Garrett's first shove to Morgan's last word. By midday, the video was on every social media platform in the county. By evening, it had crossed state lines. By nightfall, #MorganEllis was trending, followed by #StandUpRidgemont and #TeacherTakedown. Comment sections exploded. "Who is this woman? She didn't throw 1 punch. That's not fighting. That's training. Queen." People shared it, reacted to it, slowed it down frame by frame. The wrist lock on Garrett, the sweep on Tanner, the calm in her eyes while 5 men surrounded her. The video racked up millions of views within days. Morgan didn't watch it. She went home, took a shower, and wrote in her journal. But while she was writing, Garrett Hale was dialing his lawyer, and soon an assault complaint had been filed against Morgan Ellis at the county courthouse. The woman who hadn't thrown a single punch was now facing criminal charges. 5 men jump 1 woman. She doesn't throw a single punch. Not one. And she catches the charge. Not them. Her. Put yourself there. You do everything right and they still come for you. If that doesn't make your blood boil, nothing will. One morning, Morgan pulled into the Ridgemont parking lot. 2 police cruisers were already there. An officer met her at the front door with a folded document. "Morgan Ellis." "Yes." "You've been served. Assault complaint filed by Garrett Hale, Reed Lawson, Colton Briggs, Tanner Holt, and Jace Porter. You're also suspended from teaching duties, pending a full investigation by the school board." Morgan took the document and read it standing in the doorway as students walked past. Some stared, some whispered. One sophomore touched her arm. "We saw what really happened, Miss Ellis." Morgan nodded. "Go to class." She drove home with the document on her passenger seat. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She sat in her apartment for a few minutes, reading every word. Then she called Shelby Grant. "They filed," Morgan said. All five. Same story, same lawyer. They were saying she had attacked without provocation." Shelby let out a slow breath. "Coordinated statements, that means they rehearsed. What about the school security cameras? I'll find out." She found out quickly. Soon, Jace Porter had filed a request with the school's IT department to archive the security footage from the football field. Archive was a polite word for delete. The young IT coordinator, who had been at Ridgemont only a short time, didn't ask questions. He just did it. The footage was gone. When Morgan heard, she sat at her kitchen table and opened her journal. She wrote one line. "They erased the camera footage. They don't know about the rest." The rest was Darius's phone, 11 minutes and 43 seconds of uncut video. Every shove, every swing, every takedown, time-stamped and geo-tagged, saved to his cloud drive, and backed up on a USB stick that Morgan now kept in a locked box under her bed. But Morgan didn't release the video. Not yet. Shelby told her to wait. Let them build their lie as tall as they wanted. The taller it grew, the harder it would fall. Soon, Garrett's version reached the local news. The anchor read from a statement provided by Garrett's attorney. 5 Ridgemont High staff members were violently attacked during a school-sponsored event by a fellow employee. The victims were seeking full criminal prosecution and civil damages. They showed Garrett's photo, smiling in his coaching jersey, arms around students. They showed Morgan's employee badge photo, unsmiling, flat-lit, the kind of picture that makes anyone look like a suspect. No context, no student interviews, no mention that Garrett had thrown the first shove. Garrett watched the broadcast from his living room. Reed sat next to him, beers on the table. Garrett leaned back and grinned. "She's done. Nobody comes back from this." Reed nodded. "What about the kid's video, the one who was filming?" Garrett waved his hand dismissively. "A student's phone video against 5 adult witnesses and a police report. Nobody's going to care." He was wrong, but he didn't know it yet. Soon, Morgan's name was everywhere, and not in a good way. Local Facebook groups split down the middle. Half the comments called her a hero. The other half called her dangerous. She attacked 5 men. What kind of teacher does that? Doesn't matter what they said to her. Violence is never the answer. She should be in jail, not a classroom. Morgan read none of it. Shelby had told her to stay off the internet. Anything you post, like, or comment becomes evidence. Go dark. Morgan went dark. She unplugged her router and turned off her phone in the evenings. She ran several miles every morning at dawn, came home and reviewed her evidence folder. Multiple incidents before the fitness challenge. Dash cam footage of Reed near her truck, the night her tires were slashed. A saved voicemail from the principal's office, admitting he had received her complaint. Journal entries with details that matched email trails and Darius's video. Shelby drove down from Atlanta. They sat at Morgan's kitchen table late into the night, organizing everything into a single file, chronological, cross-referenced, and clean enough to present in any courtroom. "When do we use this?" Morgan asked. "At the hearing, in front of everyone, on the record." Shelby closed the folder. "They want a public execution. We'll give them a public trial." The school board hearing was set for soon. Both sides would present evidence in an open session, community invited. Garrett spent the time rehearsing his testimony with his lawyer, Miles Harrington. The story was simple. Morgan had snapped during the fitness challenge and attacked 5 unarmed men. No provocation, no warning, just violence. Garrett also made calls. 3 school board members had known him for years. He coached their kids, ran their fundraisers, shook their hands at church. He reminded each of them, casually but carefully, how much he had done for Ridgemont. "You know me," he told board member Lorraine Whitaker over the phone. "For years. You really going to take the word of a woman who's only been here a short time?" Lorraine didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Just tell the truth, Garrett. That's all any of us have to do." Garrett hung up and poured himself another drink. He wasn't worried about the truth. He was worried about control. And for years, control had never been a problem. Meanwhile, something was happening that Garrett didn't see. Shelby had filed a counter-complaint on Morgan's behalf for harassment, workplace intimidation, and destruction of evidence. Attached were 4 things: Morgan's incident journal, the dash cam footage, a formal request to investigate the deleted security tapes, and a subpoena for Ridgemont's fundraiser financial records from the past several years. The subpoena landed on Principal Langford's desk. He read it twice, then closed his office door, and didn't come out for some time. 3 former Ridgemont teachers, the ones who had quit before Morgan arrived, had also been contacted by Shelby. Each one agreed to submit a written statement describing their experience with Garrett Hale. Same pattern, same tactics: intimidation, isolation, forced resignation. None of them had spoken up before. They were afraid. But Morgan's video, the one the whole country had seen, changed something. It made them feel less alone. On the night before the hearing, Morgan sat on her apartment floor, evidence folder on the table, boots by the door, journal in her lap. She turned to the first page, the entry from her early days at Ridgemont. She read it out loud to herself quietly, the way her grandmother used to read scripture on Sunday mornings. Then she closed the journal, turned off the light, and went to bed. Tomorrow, she wouldn't need her hands. She would need her voice. The morning of the hearing, every seat in the Ridgemont High Auditorium was taken. Parents, students, local reporters. 2 camera crews from Atlanta stations that had picked up the story. A row of folding chairs had been added along the back wall, and those were full too. People stood in the doorway, some holding phones, some holding signs. "Stand with Morgan" on one side of the aisle, "Protect our staff" on the other. The school board sat behind a long table on the stage. 5 members. Lorraine Whitaker in the center. Microphones, water pitchers, a stack of folders thick enough to prop open a door. Garrett Hale sat on the left side with his lawyer, Miles Harrington, in a gray suit and silver watch. The kind of attorney who billed by the half hour and never smiled. Reed, Colton, Tanner, and Jace sat in the row behind them, all in collared shirts, all quiet. Garrett had told them to look calm and professional, like victims. Morgan sat on the right side, Shelby Grant beside her, one folder on the table. Morgan wore a navy blouse and flat shoes, no jewelry, no expression. She looked the way she always looked, still. Lorraine Whitaker opened the session. "This is a public hearing regarding the incident at the Ridgemont staff fitness event. Both parties will present statements and evidence. We'll begin with the complainant." Miles Harrington stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the microphone like a man who had done this 100 times. "On the day of the event, during a voluntary school fitness event, my clients, 5 longtime Ridgemont employees, were physically assaulted by Ms. Morgan Ellis without warning, without provocation. Mr. Hale suffered a dislocated shoulder. Mr. Lawson sustained facial abrasions. Mr. Briggs has been unable to extend his right wrist fully since the incident." He paused to let the words settle. "My clients are not here to attack Ms. Ellis's character. They are here to ask one simple question. Is this the kind of behavior we accept from someone trusted with our children?" He returned to his seat. Garrett nodded slowly, rehearsed. Lorraine turned to the right side of the room. "Ms. Ellis, your response." Shelby stood. She didn't walk to the microphone. She spoke from the table, clear and unhurried. We'd like to present our evidence in order, chronological, starting well before the fitness event. Lorraine nodded. Proceed. Shelby opened the folder. Entry 1. Miss Ellis's early days at Ridgemont. She was assigned to room 108, a classroom condemned for mold and removed from the active roster years prior, assigned by Mr. Hale, who had no authority over classroom placement. She placed the document on the table. Entry 2. Miss Ellis's supply budget was redirected to the PE department, approved by Mr. Hale. No principal signature. Another document. Entry 3. Miss Ellis was physically struck in the hallway by Mr. Holt, witnessed by 6 students. No report filed. The room shifted. A few parents leaned forward. Shelby kept going. Entry after entry. Multiple incidents with dates, times, and descriptions. Each one matched to a saved email, a journal page, or a dashcam timestamp. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't editorialize. She simply laid the facts on the table like bricks. When she reached the entry about the storage room confrontation, she read Morgan's journal word for word. Garrett's voice captured in Morgan's handwriting. "You don't belong here. Not in this school. Not in this town." Garrett's lawyer leaned over and whispered something. Garrett shook his head. Then Shelby said, "We'd now like to address the footage from the event." Miles Harrington stood immediately. The school's security footage from that date has been archived and is currently unavailable. Shelby didn't blink. "We're not referring to the school's footage." She pulled a USB drive from the folder. "This is an 11-minute, 43-second recording captured by a student's phone, unedited, time-stamped, geotagged." She handed the drive to the board's IT assistant. Moments later, the video played on the auditorium's projection screen. The crowd watched in silence. Garrett shoving Morgan. Morgan stumbling, 5 men closing in. Then Morgan, calm, precise, surgical, neutralizing each one without a single closed fist. When it ended, nobody spoke. A woman in the 3rd row was crying. Lorraine Whitaker removed her glasses and set them on the table. "Mr. Hale, the video clearly shows you initiating physical contact. Do you have a response?" Garrett pushed his lawyer away and leaned into his microphone. "That video is edited. It's been... She set me up. That whole event. She wanted this to happen." His voice cracked. The room heard it. Shelby stood again. "One more item, if the board will allow." Lorraine nodded. "We subpoenaed Ridgemont's fundraiser financial records from the past several years. Mr. Hale managed these accounts personally." Shelby placed a spreadsheet on the table. Over the past several years, a significant amount in fundraiser revenue cannot be accounted for. Receipts are missing. Deposits don't match reported totals. Student program funds were dispersed to accounts controlled by Mr. Hale and his associates. The auditorium erupted. Voices, gasps. A parent in the 4th row stood up and pointed at Garrett. "That was our money. Our kids' money." Lorraine banged the table. "Order!" But Shelby wasn't done. "We also received written testimony from 3 former Ridgemont teachers, Ms. Elena Vargas, Mr. Raymond Cole, and Ms. Fiona Shaw, each of whom had resigned in recent years. Each statement describes a pattern of intimidation, isolation, and harassment carried out by Mr. Hale and his group, the same pattern Ms. Ellis documented. She placed 3 sealed envelopes on the table. Then, she said the words that broke the room open. "Finally, the board should be aware that an anonymous complaint was filed against Garrett Hale years ago. It described harassment of a female teacher. That complaint was received by the former principal and never investigated. It was buried." Lorraine Whitaker's face went pale. She turned to the board member on her left, then to the one on her right. None of them spoke. Garrett stood up. His chair scraped the floor. His lawyer grabbed his arm. Garrett pulled away. This is garbage. All of it. I gave years to this school. Sit down, Mr. Hale. Lorraine's voice was ice. Garrett sat. The room was silent. Every phone pointed at the stage. Every eye on the board. Lorraine looked at Morgan. Ms. Ellis, do you have anything to say? Morgan stood. She didn't move to the microphone. She spoke from where she was, quiet, steady, the same voice she used in room 108. I didn't come to Ridgemont to fight anyone. I came here to teach. I came here because my grandmother told me, the best thing you can do with strength is build someone up. She paused. But I will never apologize for defending myself. And I will never apologize for standing up for my students. She sat down. The auditorium didn't cheer. It was something deeper than that. A long, heavy exhale. The sound of a room full of people who had watched something shift that could not be shifted back. Lorraine Whitaker spoke into the microphone. The board will deliberate. We'll reconvene shortly with our decision. Morgan sat with her hands folded, perfectly still. Shelby put a hand on her shoulder. Outside the auditorium, Darius sat on the hallway floor with his back against the wall. He had watched the whole thing through the cracked door. His phone was in his pocket. His hands were shaking, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. He was proud. After some time, the board had reached their decision. When the doors opened, people rushed back to their seats. The auditorium filled in moments. The noise was louder now, conversations layered on top of each other, chairs scraping, phones buzzing. Someone near the back said, "Here we go." Then, Lorraine Whitaker walked onto the stage, and the room went dead silent. She didn't sit down. She stood behind the microphone, with a single sheet of paper in her hand. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose. She looked out at the crowd for a long moment before speaking. The board has reached a unanimous decision. She looked down at the paper. First, regarding the complaint filed against Ms. Morgan Ellis. After reviewing video evidence, written documentation, and testimony from multiple sources, the board finds no grounds for disciplinary action. Ms. Ellis acted in clear self-defense after being physically assaulted by Mr. Hale in the presence of witnesses. The complaint is dismissed in full. A ripple moved through the room. Not cheering, not yet. Just breath. Ms. Ellis is reinstated effective immediately. She will receive full back pay for the duration of her suspension. Morgan's hands didn't move. Her face didn't change. Shelby squeezed her arm under the table. Lorraine continued. Second, regarding Mr. Garrett Hale, the board has found sufficient evidence of sustained workplace harassment, intimidation of colleagues, destruction of security footage, and financial mismanagement of school fundraiser accounts. Mr. Hale's employment at Ridgemont High is terminated, effective today. His case will be referred to the district attorney's office for further investigation into potential fraud charges. Garrett's face went white. Not red, white. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. Garrett didn't move. He stared at the table in front of him, like it had just told him something he couldn't understand. Third, regarding Mr. Reed Lawson, Mr. Colton Briggs, Mr. Tanner Holt, and Mr. Jace Porter. Each individual is placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation into their involvement in workplace harassment and the coordinated filing of a false police report. Mr. Porter will face an additional inquiry regarding the deletion of school security footage. Jace's head dropped. Tanner rubbed his face with both hands. Reed stared at the ceiling. Colton looked at Garrett, but Garrett wasn't looking at anyone. Lorraine set the paper down. This board failed Ms. Ellis. We failed the teachers who came before her. A complaint was filed years ago, and it was buried. That ends today. We will be conducting a full review of all staff conduct reports from the past several years. And we will be implementing a new independent reporting system, so that no complaint from any teacher, Any student, any parent goes unanswered again. She paused. Ms. Ellis, on behalf of this board, I owe you an apology. You deserve better from this institution. I'm sorry. Morgan stood. She nodded once. That was all. The room erupted. Students were the first to stand, then parents, then teachers. The quiet ones, the ones who had kept their heads down for years. The ones who had watched Garrett run the school and said nothing. They stood now. Darius was on his feet in the hallway. He pushed through the auditorium door and walked straight to Morgan. He didn't say anything. He just stood next to her. That was enough. Outside the building, the crowd spilled onto the front lawn. Someone had made signs overnight. Justice for Morgan. Ridgemont stands up. Parents hugged teachers. Students filmed everything. A local reporter asked Morgan for a comment. She shook her head politely and walked to her truck. By evening, the board's decision was national news. The video of Morgan's self-defense, already viral, exploded again, this time with context. News anchors played the footage alongside Shelby's evidence presentation. Legal analysts broke down the case. Former Marines posted reaction videos. #Justice for Morgan trended at #1. #StandUp Ridgemont followed right behind. Soon after, Morgan walked back into Ridgemont High through the same hallway where Garrett had knocked her down. Past the same lockers, past the same spot where her papers had scattered across the floor early on. Room 108 was unlocked. The desks were upright. The whiteboard was clean. Someone had left flowers on her desk. No card, just wildflowers in a mason jar. Morgan set down her bag, picked up a marker, and wrote 4 words on the board. Lesson 1, know your worth. The door opened behind her. Darius walked in and sat in the front row. He didn't say good morning. He just opened his notebook and looked up at her. Morgan capped the marker and smiled. The first real smile anyone at Ridgemont had ever seen from her. Not long after, Morgan submitted a proposal to the school board. A free after-school program combining self-defense training with anti-bullying education, open to all students, taught by Morgan and 2 fellow Marine veterans she had served with at Parris Island. The board approved it unanimously. Soon, other schools in Georgia adopted the same model. Before long, the program had a name, Stand Up Ridgemont, and a waiting list hundreds of students long. Morgan never talked about the fitness challenge. She never watched her own video. When reporters asked how it felt to take down 5 men, she gave the same answer every time. I didn't take anyone down. I stood up. Later, Morgan Ellis stood backstage at the Georgia State Education Awards ceremony in Atlanta. Navy dress, silver bracelet her grandmother had given her the day she enlisted. Hands clasped, still steady. Georgia Teacher of the Year. Morgan hadn't applied. She didn't know she'd been nominated until Principal Langford handed her the letter. He couldn't look her in the eye when he said, "Congratulations." The host read the introduction. Polite applause. Then a different voice came through the speakers. "I'd like to introduce this year's recipient, if that's okay." Darius, in a dark suit, slightly too big in the shoulders, now a senior. The same kid who once walked close to walls. He adjusted the microphone. "A year ago, I was invisible. I kept my head down. I figured if nobody saw me, nobody could hurt me." He paused. "Then I met Ms. Ellis. The room went silent. She didn't tell me to fight back. She told me to wait. She said, 'Discipline is choosing your moment.' I didn't understand that at first." He looked toward the side of the stage. "It means knowing who you are and not letting anyone take that from you." He turned back to the crowd. Miss Ellis got knocked to the floor early on, got her classroom vandalized, got suspended for defending herself. And she came back. She came back and she taught. She came back and she built something. His voice cracked. "The Stand Up Ridgemont program has reached many schools and hundreds of students. I'm one of them. I'm not invisible anymore." He smiled. "And I'm not walking close to walls." He stepped back. "Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Morgan Ellis." The room stood before she reached the podium. She set her hands on the wood, looked out, and said 5 words. My grandmother was right. The applause lasted a long time. Garrett Hale's fraud case was still pending. Reed Lawson resigned. Colton Briggs transferred. Tanner Holt left teaching. Jace Porter pleaded guilty to tampering and received probation. Ridgemont looked different now. A new reporting system, a new oversight committee, a hallway board where students pinned notes about what standing up meant to them. Morgan still drove the same truck, still arrived before sunrise, still kept a journal. Some mornings she stood alone in room 108 and read the words on her whiteboard. Lesson 1. Know your worth. Then she opened the door and let them in. Imagine getting shoved to the floor in front of 30 people just because of who you are, and nobody does a damn thing. That's why I told Morgan's story. If you've ever been knocked down and stayed quiet, you're not weak. You're dangerous. Like, share, drop your story.